morning, students. Good morning, other cherished listeners. My name is Peter ESHUN, a senior lecturer at the Department of Educational Foundations, University of Education, Winneba. The radio lecture this morning is for about 300 students, reading, measurement, evaluation, and statistics in education this semester. The course code is EDC 361. In today's radio lecture, we will look at the topic, Understanding Key Concepts in Assessment. Understanding Key Concepts in Assessment. And this is in line with the first unit on the course outline. Most often, people use the terms assessment, test, measurement, and evaluation interchangeably in their daily interactions. These terms are distinct in their meaning and application. This lecture will help us to bring meaning in the assessment practices using practical classroom examples. So by the end of this radio lecture, you will be able to know the actual meaning of these terms as we use them interchangeably in our daily interactions. Now let's start with the term assessment. When we talk of assessment, assessment is a process. That is one thing we should know. Assessment is a process. And what is that process? It is a process of collecting, interpreting, and using data to understand individuals, to understand groups, or to understand systems. In education, we usually collect information on student learning and instructional effectiveness. So when we talk of assessment in education, it is defined as the process of obtaining information that is used for making decisions about students, about the curricula, about programs, about the educational policy. So when we talk of assessment in education, that is the process that we go through to obtain information. And what we use this information to make decisions about our students, about the curricula, about programs, about educational policy. But because we are training you students to go out there to be facilitators, our focus will be more on the information that we gather from our students, our learners. So assessment is done to gather data. We go through the assessment process to gather data on learning, to gather data on teaching, to gather data on schools, to gather data on the whole educational system. That will help us to make decisions. Decisions about the progress attained by our learners. So when we talk of assessment, it is broad. It is that process that we go through to collect, to interpret, and to use data. Data on our students, data on teaching, data on the whole school, data on the educational policies to help us to make decisions about the progress attained by our learners. When you go to the Ministry of Education website, and then you pick the pre-tertiary learning assessment framework from the Ministry of Education. In that document, they've stated some of the reasons for conducting assessment in our educational sector. And some of the reasons that they put there, you see learner assessment, teacher appraisal, school evaluation, and then system evaluation. That's why earlier on I said, mostly when we talk of assessment in education, people only restrict it to or limit it to learner assessment. But assessment in education goes beyond the learner. But we, because of the training that we are giving you, and the learner is key, it's at the center, we'll be focusing more on learner assessment. But the point here is that assessment goes beyond learner assessment. Let's consider some purposes for assessment in our educational sector. We assess for diagnostic purpose. That is, we assess to help identify strengths, weaknesses, and area of needs of our learners. So when we go through that process of collecting, interpreting, and using information to make decisions, one of the purposes is for diagnostic purposes. That is diagnostic. So when we gather this information, it helps us to identify strength. It helps us to identify weaknesses and then also areas of needs. Another purpose is predictive. Another purpose for assessment in our schools is predictive. That's we assess to help us to focus the future performance or behavior of our learners. So as we gather information, as we interpret and use this information, it helps us to predict. It helps us to focus the future performance and behavior of our learners. It's also for placement. One of the purposes too is for placement. We assess to assign individuals to appropriate levels or groups. So when we gather this information, when we interpret and use, it will help us to assign individuals at appropriate levels or groups. We also assess for formative purposes. Another purpose is for formative. That is when we assess, it helps us to monitor the progress and provide ongoing feedback. So we assess for formative purposes. That will help us to monitor the progress of our learners so that we can provide ongoing feedback. And feedback and advice is very key in formative assessment. When we are gathering information so as to monitor the progress and provide ongoing feedback, then we should know that in assessment, feedback and advice is very key. Another purpose is summative. That is, we assess to help evaluate the final outcome of learning or interventions that we put across. And we can also assess for evaluation to help us to judge the effectiveness of a program, a strategy, or intervention that we put in place. So we have different purposes for conducting assessment. That's what we said, gathering data, interpreting and using to make informed decisions. For diagnostic purposes, predictive purposes, for placement, for formative, and then for summative, and then also for evaluation. So basically, when we say assessment, it has to do with going through the process of collecting data, interpreting and using it for decision making. Most of the decisions that we make at the end of the day don't work because sometimes we don't make those decisions based on data. But when we say we are assessing, we go through processes that we gather data, we interpret and we use so as to make informed decisions. Now, sometimes you hear people, they will be conducting a test. Then they will tell you we are assessing. We don't equate test to assessment. When we say test often consists of a set of questions or tasks or prompts. Test is a specific instrument or tool that we use to measure individual skills, knowledge, abilities, or other characteristics. So in assessment practice, when we talk of tests, it consists of those set of questions that we set, those tasks that we give to our learners for us to be able to measure their individual skills, measure their knowledge, to measure their abilities or other characteristics. So in a school situation, sometimes those set of questions, those series of tasks come from the classroom teachers. So you can hear people talking about teacher-made tests. What it means is that those set of questions are from the classroom teacher. That's why I say teacher-made test. That's designed by the classroom teacher. Or sometimes we have standardized tests. Like in Ghana here, the WAEC exam, yes, from expert set. And it's standard because it has uniform way of administration, uniform way of scoring, uniform way of interpreting and using the result. That's why we call it a standardized test. So when we talk of tests, basically those set of questions, those set of series of tasks that we give to our learners to respond to, that helps us to measure their skills, knowledge, abilities, or other characteristics. So tests connote the presentation of a set of questions to be answered. But when we talk of testing, testing is a process. That process of administering, scoring, and interpreting tests, that's what we refer to as testing. So test is the instrument, but the process of administering this instrument, scoring this, and then interpreting is what we refer to as testing. So we hear people talking about classroom testing, classroom testing. Testing is a process, but test is those set of questions that will help us to measure the skills, knowledge, and other characteristics of our learners. We can classify tests in so many ways. But when we are doing classification of these tests, we use the criteria like whether we use purpose to do the classification, uses to do the classification, or we use the nature of the test to do the classification. So when we use this criteria, purpose, uses, nature, we can classify tests in so many ways. In our schools, you hear teachers talking about achievement tests, achievement tests. It's a classification of tests using purpose as a criterion. So why do they say achievement tests? Achievement tests because in our school system, we have specific content areas that we take our learners through. And at the end of the day, we set questions on what we took our learners through. The purpose is to find out whether they were able to achieve, whether they were able to gain something out of whatever that we took them through. That is why we refer to it as achievement tests. So most classroom tests that we conduct are achievement tests. And it's a classification based on purpose. Sometimes you hear of diagnostic test. It's a classification based on purpose. The reason for that test is to find out, use that test to find out the strengths and weaknesses and area of needs of our learners. So in a way, you are using that test to diagnose the learners. That's why it's being referred to as diagnostic tests. So with purpose, we can classify tests in some of these ways. Sometimes we hear of intelligence tests. It means that test, the purpose is to use to find out the intelligence level of the learner. That's why we refer to it as intelligence tests. So we can use purpose to classify tests in so many ways, and these are some of the ways. When we talk of the uses, we have two major classifications of tests. Either we say norm reference test, norm, N-O-R-M. Either we say norm referenced test, or we say criterion reference test. When we say norm, the norm is the group that took that particular test. So if I'm interested in, let's take in Ghana, let's take the BEC that we do. I think that's a common thing that will let us understand this concept very well. You know, BEC, so many people don't know that BEC, if we are talking about uses, is a norm reference test. The reason being that the aggregates that our learners get at the end of the day, it doesn't really tell us the actual ability of the learner. Because those aggregates are based on the performance of that child in relation to that particular year group, those who took the test. So if, let's say, 2023, BEC exam that the learners took, if a child should get a subject like social studies, aggregate 1, what it means is that per the grading system being used at the basic level for BEC, the standard 1 to 9, what we call the ST9, That's why the grades, they use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, up to 9. These grades, as you see them, they are in percentages. So it's already established. And the rule is that it is based on the hypothetical normal curve as we hear of. That when you give a test to a large group of people, their performance at the end of the day should follow that bell-shaped curve, the normal curve. And it's in percentages. So it's already established that at the end of the day, whatever scores that the learners will get, they rank the scores from the highest to the lowest. And the top 4% of that particular year group will get aggregate 1 for that particular subject. So if you are fortunate that year group, you belong to the top 4%, you get 1 for that subject. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are exceptional. So if you pick the BEC results, you realize that the remarks they put, they attach to those grades. When somebody should get aggregate 1, they write highest. And when somebody should get aggregate 9, they write lowest. They don't say fail. Because it's norm. The performance is being compared to the group. That is that grading system. So for BEC, that is norm. Those who took the test, the performance of an individual is compared to the group, the performance of the group. So where you fall, that is where the grade that you get. So when we meet in our various lecture theaters, other lecturers will help you to understand. That is why when they are doing the computer selection, they don't use aggregate. They use total raw score to do the selection. Because the aggregate will not actually tell us the actual ability of the student. But it will tell us the position of the student so far as the group that took the test, that the norm group, is concerned. So that is what we refer to as a norm reference. And when we say criterion simply means standard. So making reference to a standard. So that's why the standard is set. If you meet, then whatever grade assigned to that level is given to you. So that one, they don't compare your performance to the group. Your performance is compared to the standard set. That's why we call criterion reference, making reference to the standard. So when we are using uses, we either have a norm reference test or a criterion reference test. And when we want to use nature to, the nature of the test, the normal test that we print questions for students to answer, in assessment practice, we refer to it as paper and pencil test. That's the nature. Sometimes there are some tests, questions are asked orally and students respond. So that's the nature, so we say oral test. And 21st century, we are now even pushing for hands-on, what we refer to as a performance task, where you engage in activities. And a sub of the performance task is what we refer to as authentic, doing real-life things for people to assess you on. So we can use this criteria, that is purpose, uses, and nature, to classify tests in so many ways. But when we talk of tests in assessment practice, basically it is those set of questions or series of tasks or prompts that we give to our learners to respond to. But the process of using these tests, administering, scoring, interpreting, that is what we refer to as testing. And it's part of the assessment process. Another term that we need to, or concept that we need to also understand, is what we refer to as measurement. Measurement. When you go to the social side, when you go to your seamstress or your tailor, the seamstress will tell you that, let me measure you. Basically, what will the person be doing? The person will try to assign numbers to your body parts, your vital statistics. That's what we refer to. So we tell you your waist is 35, your chest is something, then it's number assigning. So when we talk of measurement, basically it's the process of quantifying, assigning numbers, quantifying individuals' attributes or performance or any characteristic that you are interested in. So when we say measurement, it is that process of quantifying an individual's attributes, performance, or characteristics by assigning numerical or symbolic values according to a set of rules. You don't just assign numbers, you assign numbers based on rules. That is why when you go to your seamstress, the seamstress will not go for any rope to tie your waist or whatever. In that situation, the seamstress will use the tape measure. That is the rule. The same way, if you are a mathematics instructor or facilitator, and you give your mathematics test to your student, and you want to assign numbers to their performance, you don't just assign. You assign those numbers based on your marking scheme, the scoring key. So numbers are not just assigned, but those numbers are assigned based on specific rules. So measurement answer the question, how much? If you say you are measuring, you are quantifying. It answers the question, how much? So measurement is a process of quantifying the degree to which someone or something possesses a given characteristic, quality, or a feature. So basically, when we hear people saying measurement, it has to do with quantifying. So assigning numbers based on specific rules. Now, depending on the kind of characteristics or traits or attribute that you are taking into consideration and how those numbers are assigned, we have what we call levels of measurement or scales of measurement. And sometimes you are exposed to these levels of measurement so that you know that not all numbers that you can do any other thing with it. It depends on how those numbers were assigned. So we have 4 basic levels or 4 scales of measurement. We have and these scales of measurement is in a form of hierarchy. It's hierarchical. As you move up, then the level of complexity will increase. And it also informs you the kind of statistical analysis that you can make with those numbers. So the lowest level is what we call the nominal level or the nominal scale. Some materials will state categorical scale. It's the same level. That's the lowest level. And then we move on to the next level, which is the ordinal scale. We move to the next, which is the interval scale. And then the ratio scale, that is the highest. And depending on the level, how those numbers were assigned, the scale that was used, that will inform you how you can use those numbers. When we meet in our various lecture theaters, I think various lecturers will go into details how these scales work and what we can do with the numbers assigned using these scales. But let me quickly just use a typical example. Like, let's use the lowest scale. That is the nominal scale. If numbers are assigned using the nominal scale, those numbers are just for identification and categorization purposes. They don't have value. Example, when you are collecting data on your learners and you are interested in the gender of your learners, that's the kind of variable you are considering. So you decide that when you come across a male learner, you assign 1. When you come across a female learner, you assign 2. So if that data is displayed and I see 2, 2, 2, 2, 4 of the 2s, I can't say I'm adding 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 and say 8. No. Those numbers are just for identification. So all that I can do is to count how many 2s to know that I have 4 females. And the fact that the females are represented with the number 2 and males represented with 1 doesn't mean that they are higher than the males. I can change it. I can make it males 2, females 1. It doesn't change anything. It's just for identification purposes. So before you use any data, you come across numbers, you should first know how those numbers were assigned, which scale was used, before you know what to do with those numbers. The only level that you are comfortable to use all those statistical tools to make meaning from the data is when you are at the highest level. That is the ratio level, the ratio scale. that one, ratio scale is having absolute 0. So when you assign the number 0, it means there's nothing there. So that one, if you are using the ratio scale for quantifying the attribute, then you can be doing all those statistical things that you want to do. Example, if I'm measuring my student, the height of my student, and I write somebody's height is 0 meters, it means there's no height. But if I measure and say somebody's height is 4 meters or 3 meters, and another person's height is 6 meters, because 0 means nothing, I can confidently say that the one who is 6 meters is twice as tall as the one who is 3 meters, because 0 is absolute. But when you come down to the lower scales, you can't be making some of these conclusions. So when we get to our various lecture theaters, other lecturers will go into details what these scales means and how we can make meaning from these numbers. Most of the things that we gather from, the information we gather from our students, especially with performance. Performance, mostly we are dealing with the interval scale. The reason being that for the interval scale, 0 doesn't mean total absence. So when you give your social studies test to your student, and at the end of the day, using your marking scheme, the student should get 0. It doesn't mean that the student don't know any social studies. What the 0 is telling you is that the student is having little knowledge in the area of coverage that you took them through. It doesn't mean total absence. So those days when teachers were decorating zeros, they didn't know what they were doing. They were causing more harm than good. They give the zeros eyes, nose, earrings, because they don't know what they were doing. The 0 doesn't mean total absence. Because of that, that is why if somebody should get your social studies test score 30, let's say 30%, and another person should get 60%, you can't say that the one who got 60% is twice knowledgeable in social studies than the one who got 30%. No. Because with the interval scale, 0 doesn't mean total absence. So you can't draw those conclusions. So basically, the points I'm drawing at is that measurement means quantification, assigning numbers to attributes or traits of the individual based on specific rules. We have different levels of measurement, what we refer to as different scales of measurement. And depending the scale that we use for the quantification, that will inform us how we can make meaning from those numbers. So in our various lecture theaters, I'm very sure we'll go deep for you to understand these scales of measurement. All right, now the other concept or term that we also need to know for us to establish the base well is evaluation. When we say we are evaluating, what does it mean? Evaluation is defined as the process of making a value judgment about the worth of a student product or a student performance. So when we try to make value judgment about the worth of a student performance, we say we are evaluating. So evaluation has to do with judgment. Let's take a classroom situation. I keep on asking my student that if I give you a test, maybe measurement and evaluation, you are given a test. And some days later after the test, you meet me and you ask, Doc, the test, what was my performance? And I tell you that, oh, you scored 90. What will be your reaction? Mostly they will tell you that they will be very happy. Because he said they scored 90, they will be very happy. Then I'll continue and ask them, so if the following week I bring the test papers and I start sharing, and I give you your paper and you see your 90, then I give the others their papers and you see people scoring 600, 700, 800, what will be your reaction? The same student who will say, I will be happy with the 90, will say, no, I will be very sad. But the 90 has not changed. But at one point, the person said, I will be happy. At another point, the person is saying, I will be sad. Simply because the first time that he or she will hear that I had 90, he didn't find the worth, the value of the 90, and just said that I will be happy. Didn't evaluate. 90 is nothing until you put weight on it, you value it. So when you try to make value judgment about the worth of a student product or performance, then we say you are evaluating. So we say we are doing evaluation. That's when we are going through that process of making judgments of value of effectiveness from our quantitative or qualitative data. So when we get that information and we want to find the worth of it, then we say we are evaluating. And we can't evaluate without measuring. That's why we are saying making judgment on both quantitative true measurement, and qualitative data is not true measurement, because we are saying measurement has to do with quantifying. So we can evaluate. That's the point I want to make. We can still do evaluation without measuring. If in the classroom situation or in the school situation, you are theater arts teacher and you teach students how to perform a specific dance, and then at the end of the day you are gathering information from them and you ask them to do the performance and you sit back to observe. Already you have some things that you want to see in the performance to make your judgment. So as they perform, you can now make judgment and say they are doing good performance, bad performance, whatever performance. You are in the realm of evaluation. You are judging. But you've not assigned any numbers before doing those judgments. You are basing on certain criteria. So we can't evaluate without measurement. And with evaluation, you either evaluate formatively or summatively. And when we say we are doing formative evaluation, it's usually conducted during the process of the program. I'm using the words where I say usually. It is usually conducted during the process of the program. And the focus of formative evaluation is improving or refining the ongoing activities. So when you are judging so that you can improve or refine whatever activities that you are taking your learners through, then you say you are doing formative evaluation. But when you do summative is looking at the overall effectiveness of the outcome or the outcome of whatever that you are judging. So you either evaluate formatively or summatively. But in assessment practice, to say it is formative or summative, it's not necessarily whether it is during or it is at the end. But usually it is the intention that you carry. That's why we normally say it is usually done. So the fact that you are doing it at the end of the unit or at the end of the term or what have you, doesn't necessarily mean that that is summative. It depends on the intention. Because we can use summative for formative purposes. Likewise, we can use formative for summative purposes. So we need to take note of these basic things. So basically, this morning from the beginning of the radio lecture, talking about the topic of understanding key concepts in assessment. We've tried to look at the meaning of assessment, the purposes why we assess. We also looked at the meaning of test and what we mean by saying we are testing. And then also we looked at what measurement is. And then we also discussed how numbers are being assigned by trying to let us understand that it's not all numbers that we can use any statistical tool to make meaning from it. Before we do that, we need to make sure that we know the scale that was used for the assigning of the numbers. And then we've also looked at the issue of evaluation. When do we say we are evaluating? I think we will open the phone line and then listen to your comments and then clarify your questions. The studio line is 050 392 3158. 050 392 3158. You can WhatsApp, you can send SMS. All right, so let me highlight on some of the key points so far as we wait for your questions and your contributions. We said when we talk of assessment, assessment is a broad term. And when we say we are assessing, it is a process. And that process, we go through that process to collect, to interpret, and to use data to understand individuals or groups, or to understand a system, depending on what you are gathering the data on. But we normally focus more on learner assessment, because we are being trained to go and train people. So that when people are interested in our care, we'll be able to gather the right information and make the right meaning and make the right decisions. So when we talk of assessment, it's basically that process of collecting, interpreting, and using data to understand individuals, groups, or systems. And we gather information so that we can make informed decisions. So the broad term assessment is going through this process of information gathering so as to make informed decisions. And we can make decisions on learning, on teaching, on curricula, on educational system, anything that we are interested in getting, being assessed, collecting and making meaning and making decision out of. That is assessment. And I said that we have so many purposes for assessing. And we went through some of the purposes for assessment. And we said we assess for diagnostic purpose, where we assess to help identify strength, weaknesses, and address and areas of needs. We assess to help us identify the strength, the weaknesses, and area of needs of our learners. So we said it's for diagnostic purposes. We also said it's for predictive purpose. That is, we assess to help focus future performance or behavior of our learners. So through the information that we collect, interpret, and use, we can make decisions on what will happen in future, so far as the performance and behavior of our learners is concerned. And we also said for placement, we assess to help assign individuals to appropriate levels or groups. So through assessment, we know where to put people, where they can function based on their abilities. So for placement. And we also said we assess for formative purposes. For formative purposes, to help us to monitor progress, to provide ongoing feedback. So when we are assessing for formative purposes, then the intention is to monitor progress and then to provide ongoing feedback for improvement. And feedback and advice is very key when we are doing formative assessment. Then we also said we assess for summative purposes. That's to help evaluate the final outcome of learning, or the interventions that we put across for our learners. Then we also assess, that will help us to evaluate for evaluation purposes. That's to judge the effectiveness of a program, a strategy, or intervention. So we have so many purposes. This, together with others, that make us to go through the assessment process. Then we also looked at what test it. And we said when we talk of tests, it consists of those set of questions, those series of tasks, those prompts that we give to our learners to respond to. That is test. So it connotes a series of questions to be answered. That is test. But how we use these tests is what we refer to as testing. The process of administering, scoring, and interpreting these tests. That is what we refer to as testing. So test is an instrument, the tool. And the testing is a process. Sorry, testing is the process. And we also talked about how we classify tests. Sometimes we hear people talking about different classification of tests. And I said, basically, when you are classifying tests, you use the criteria like the purpose, uses, and then the nature. So sometimes you hear achievement tests, you hear diagnostic tests, you hear aptitude tests, you hear intelligence tests. These are classifications based on purpose. And most classroom tests are achievement tests. And I explained why. I said the achievement test because in our school setting we have specific content areas that we take our learners through. And we set questions on those areas. What we know, they know. Or we want to find out whether they were able to gain or achieve something. That's the purpose. So most classroom tests are achievement tests. And I said with achievement tests, those tests are constructed by the classroom teacher. That's what we refer to as a teacher-made test. Some are constructed by experts. And then they have uniform way of administering the test. They have uniform way of scoring, uniform way of interpreting and using the result. That makes it standard. So we call it standardized tests. And they all serve their purposes. So we looked at what test is. And then we also focus on what measurement is. And we said when we talk of measurement, it has to do with assigning numbers, quantifying whatever attribute or characteristic that we are interested in, according to specific rules. That is very important because when we are measuring, we don't just assign the numbers. We assign the numbers based on rules. And then, depending on whatever attribute that we are interested in and how those numbers, those numbers were assigned, we have what we call the levels of measurement, or otherwise scales of measurement. And I said we have 4 basic scales in the form of it's hierarchical. As you move higher, the level of complexity increases. And it informs us the kind of analysis that we can make. We can do to make meaning from those numbers. Lowest being nominal, to ordinal, to interval, and then to ratio scale. The ratio scale is the highest. That is the only scale that 0 is absolute. When you say 0, it means total absent. Hello? Oh, please call back. You are off. Please call back. All right, so we have some messages. Good morning, sir. My name is William Amuzu from the Political Science Department. Please, I want you to explain to me the arbitrary 0 in interval scale and absolute 0 in ratio scale under the scales of measurement. All right, that is good. So, Amuzu, when we say absolute 0, it means when you assign. Okay, you have a caller. Okay, hello. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, your name and department, please, and you can come with your contribution.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, hello, we can hear you, please. Go ahead.
Hello, good morning, sir.
Good morning.
Yeah, please, my name is Samuel. Calling from the history department.
Please go ahead.
Hello.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, so my question will be on the purpose of learning assessment. And then with the purpose, I would like to place emphasis on the placement. From your explanation, you said to assess learners, to place them in their respective groups. Now, here's the case. I go to class, and then I decided to take the intelligent ones from the bad ones. Let me put it that way. So when that happens, it makes it look as if I'm being biased. And so to be at the paper side as a teacher, how do I place my learners when it comes to their intelligence level in class? Thank you.
All right, so if I heard you well, you are saying that we assess people for placement purposes. And if you decide to put the, in quote, intelligent ones at one place and others at another place, you are not doing things right. So how do you do it? We have different formation of different ways of forming groups. You have different ways of forming groups depending on the purpose for the formation of the group. But in a normal classroom setting, when we are doing groups, we normally do mixed ability because already you know their levels. So we form groups, and sometimes the aim is to learn from each other. Sometimes too, we form groups based on ability. And then you do that because you have specific tasks for a specific group of people. So forming groups, we can form groups based on different reasons. So we need to know why the groups are being formed before we can say what you've done is right or wrong. Thank you very much. All right, so we can go back to Amuzu's question. Amuzu, we say absolute zero. When you assign number 0 to any trait, and what it really means is that there's total absence. That trait doesn't exist. Then you say the 0 is absolute. Let's take it that if you want to measure the height of someone, and then you say the height is 0 meters. There's no height. There's no height. If you want to weigh something and say the weight is 0 kilograms, there's no weight. That is what we mean by the absolute 0. But when we say arbitrary means that when you assign that 0, it doesn't mean that there's total absence. And I use the normal thing we do in school, measuring the performance of our learners. So if you give your political science test to your learners using your marking scheme, and the learner should score 0, can you say that because that learner scored 0, the learner don't have any knowledge on political science? No, that is not it. It's only giving you indication that the knowledge of that person is very small, it's weak. So 0 is arbitrary. I mean, that is a characteristic of the interval scale. All right, let me see whether we have any message to okay, this one is just saying, I'm enjoying your presentation and want to find out whether mid-semester exams is a formative or a summative evaluation. Okay, so that's a good question. Maybe you are referring to our system. In our system, the mid-semester exam that you do, we add the score to the final exam score for grading. So in that situation, it's summative. But if you are doing mid-semester, and then we are going to base on that result to know whether the semester is going on well, your learning is going on well, whether we need to improve whether methodology, presentation, or how certain things are being done, then we refer to it as formative. That is why I said the intention is very important. But the way we practice it, if that is what you are referring to, then it is summative. Thank you very much. Any other? Okay. So, we are still waiting. We have some few minutes to go. We are waiting for your comments, your questions, or your contributions. All right, so we talked about these scales of measurement, and I said details of it will be done in our various lecture theaters. Then we also looked at what evaluation is. And I said, when we talk of evaluation, that process of making a value judgment about the worth of a student product or performance. And I use an example that if you give your test to a student, and then a student should meet you and ask of the performance. Let's say you say the student had 80, And the students, some students will say they will be happy. But at the end of the day, if you go back and you share your papers and some of them are getting higher scores, the same students will now say, I'll be sad. It means the person didn't evaluate the score before saying, I'll be happy. We have Asaman Justice in Bugiri. I'm Justice Asaman in Bugiri from Department of History. I'm enjoying your presentation. I want to find out whether Miss Semester, yeah, I think the same question that I answered earlier. Let's see if there are some other. Amuzu too, I think I've read it. Okay. So let's wait and see whether some. Xavier Adela, please. There's another one up there. Please define the first one, please. Oh, Xavier, your message is not complete. I don't know the first one that you are talking about, so you can either call or you can send another message. All right, so this morning, basically, we have looked at these 4 key concepts in our assessment practice, which we normally interchange them in our daily conversations. That is assessment, test, measurement, and evaluation. All right, now, as we wait for your calls, we have some few minutes to go. Sometimes you look at the trends of assessments. These days, you hear of assessments of learning, assessment for learning, assessment as learning. We hear of them, especially this time with the new curriculum, the stress is on these 3. Because basically, the assessment of learning is summative, and then assessment for learning, assessment as learning are formative assessments. Now we understand what we mean by summative, we understand what we mean by formative. That's why I'm summarizing it like that. So basically, the off learning is summative, and then the for learning is formative. Now we have Stephen Opai from, I'm Stephen Opai from the Department of Art Education. Please, what are the differences? What are the differences between assessment of learning, assessment as learning, assessment for learning? So Opai has even jumped the gun. Okay. All right, so Opai, when we talk of learning, as I said, it is for summative purposes. And then assessment for and assessment as learning are formative. When we say assessment of learning, then the purpose of assessment of learning, as I said, is usually summative. And it's mostly done at the end of a task, a unit of work, or semester or a term. It's summative assessment. What you normally do in schools. The teacher will take your learners through the contents, and at the end of the day, the student will be assessed on whatever that they went through. That is for some accountability purposes. That is assessment of learning. So it's usually done at the end of a unit, task, or that is summative assessment. And it's for accountability purposes. That's what we normally use for ranking, certifying people. That is assessment of learning. But at this level, you as a teacher, your responsibility, your role, when you want to conduct assessment of learning, that is what is very important. And because it is for summative purposes, you need to do things right. I always tell students that because you are not the final, you the facilitator, you are not the final user of the grade that you contribute for the student to get. You need to be careful when you are assessing the student, especially assessment of learning. Because whatever grade, for accountability purposes, whatever grade that you put out there for the student at the end of the day, other stakeholders are going to, based on that, to make decisions on that particular learning. So you should provide a rationale for undertaking that particular assessment. There should be a reason. Assessment of learning. There should be a reason. Why are you doing that assessment? So that at the end of the day, whatever you put out there will reflect the actual ability of the child. Then, so I keep on telling people that when you get opportunity to be a facilitator and you are conducting assessment of learning, summative assessment, avoid giving unannounced tests and adding them to the final grade of the student. You can do this unannounced assessment of learning, those summative things, but don't add the score to the final grade. When people are not ready, even those who are ready, what is their performance? Then those who are not ready. And the only reason for conducting that test is that you are not happy with your student. That is not enough reason to conduct a test and add to the final grade. That is summative, no, for accountability purposes. So there should be a reason, and then there should be a public and defensible reference point for making judgment. Assessment of learning for accountability purposes, you don't say that you are the teacher, so nobody can find out why you are making such judgment at the end of the day. It should be public. There's nothing private with assessment. So, and there should be strategies for recourse in the event of disagreement about the decision. So when you do the assessment of learning, that's summative, basically summative assessment, your learners should have opportunity to find out why they got what you are telling them is their performance level. In the tertiary institutions, we do well by having avenues for that. But mostly when you go to the pre-tertiary level, sometimes it's difficult for the learners to seek for redress when certain things happen. So that is summative. But when you say assessment for learning, when you say assessment for learning, any assessment for which the first priority in its design and practice is to serve the purpose of promoting learning. So assessment of learning is done to promote learning. That is formative assessment. Is there any message here? Yeah. William Amuzu again. Yeah, okay. Sir, please. Am I right to say assessment, test, measurement, and evaluation is cyclical? Hey, sir, this morning you are giving me big English like that. It's cyclical. Assessment first, followed by test, measurement, and before evaluation. I don't want to go through that linear tangent. If you start like that, we will get to a point that we can't continue. So, Amuzu, don't say it's cyclical. Test is one of the means, one of the instruments through which we assess. It's not only tests. So through tests, you can measure. But there are other alternatives that we go through that we still measure. So I don't want us to be like, this is the linear thing. No. But per what you are trying to say, yes, you may have a point. But let's be careful when we want to do things like that. Yeah. So, yeah, this is, I think I'm addressing that one, yes, the assessment for, yeah. So the for learning, yes, as I said, is formative assessment. The priority of assessment for learning is to promote people's learning. So as the process continues, information is gathered, and the reason for gathering the information is to help improve and then promote people's learning. That is formative assessment. That is assessment for learning. And when you are practicing formative assessment, issue with feedback and advice, very key. You can't do effective formative assessment without feedback. So you go to some schools, you realize that some teachers are guilty. They know the number of exercises they are giving. They won't be able to mark and give feedback, but they continue to do it. Always you say it and people will be laughing. That is what is happening. So they go, they know the number of children in the class are many. They give them 10 exercises each, knowing very well they come back. Then at the end of the day, they pick the books, they don't mark. Another time, they go to class, they ask the children to go for their books. Then they will tell them, leave space for correction. Put today's date. Do assignment 2. What are we doing? Even the first one, I don't know my performance. How do I do 2? So if I are really doing assessment for learning, formative, for improvement, to promote people's learning, if you think when you give 10, you can't give feedback, and it's 2 that you can give feedback for them to continue, then give 2. Give them feedback. And the feedback should be immediate. The feedback should be immediate. And it should be meaningful. Sometimes some of the feedback that some teachers give is not meaningful. It should be meaningful, it should be immediate. Some of the feedbacks that we give, we don't consider the psychological effect. Some, instead of motivating the learners, they rather kill their spirit. So when we say formative assessment, assessment for learning is to promote learning. So feedback and advice is very key. And you as a teacher, your role is to align your instruction. You are gathering this information, making meaning, and you want to promote learning. So looking at the direction of the learning, you need to align your instruction, because your aim is to promote learning. And then you need to select and adapt materials and resources when you are practicing assessment for learning. We are saying adapt because you need to modify to suit, you want to improve learning. So based on the direction of the data, what the data is telling you, you need to adapt. And then, as I said, the feedback should be immediate. But when we say assessment as learning, the learners are their own assessors. They are using assessment as part of their learning. So what you as a teacher you need to do is to rather help them to set goals and help them to monitor their learning. So the teacher, your responsibility when you are considering assessment as learning, where the responsibility is on the learner. The learner is supposed to use assessment as part of learning. So you help the learners to set goals. Help them to do self-assessment. You need to model self-assessment as a teacher yourself, so that they will know how to set goals, how to monitor their goals, and how to assess themselves. So you set a goal that I want to be here. As you are going through the process learning, you assess, you gather information. I wanted to be here at this time. Am I there? What is making me not to be there? Which special skill do I need to be there? What should I do different? That is assessment as learning. You are using assessment as part of learning, and it's also formative to improve learning. So those are the differences, Stephen. The off learning is summative, whilst the for and the as learning are formative. I think we are getting to the end of this morning's lecture, and we are done with the messages that some of you sent, and then the course, I think there was a problem with the line, that's why we didn't get it. So keep your questions, your comments. When we get to our various lecture theaters, the lecturers, we are ready to help you out. Thank you very much for listening to this morning's radio lecture. I'm Dr. Peter Shen. I'm out. Thank you.
Swala nyeme mi banye de umanye achomi Amina Abisbana michwoni ye Radio Windy Bay 98.3 FM ye fine and ye follow our ye Radio Windy Bay ye Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, ke TikTok. Radio Windy Bay ye ultimate and campus radio. Hello, my My name is Amina Abisibanan, a media personality at Radio Windy Bay 98.3 FM. Kindly follow us on all our social media handles. You can find us on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok. Follow us on www.uew.edu.gh. We are the ultimate in campus radio.
Fellow Ghanaians, my name is Osman Mumini, Head of Multimedia of Radio Windy Bay. Keep listening to Radio Windy Bay 98.3 FM, the ultimate in campus radio.
Hello there, this is Haruna Aaron Adam, a student presenter at Radio Windy Bay, and I'm with the multimedia team. You can follow us on all social media handles. Radio Windy Bay 98.3 FM, the ultimate in campus radio.